Good morning, fifth graders. Happy Friday. I just wanted to do a read aloud today for you because I think it's important for us to have some fun and just to think about things that are good. And so I'm going to do a read aloud today. I know that you guys still enjoyed being read to even in the classroom during the school year, so I'm going to read aloud a book that we read earlier this year, but I think it's one that we can revisit and think about how it applies to what's going on in the world right now. So this book is called Uncle Jed's Barber Shop, and it takes place during the Great Depression, so a major time in history where people were very frugal, and they had to be very careful with their money and very careful about what they did because there wasn't a lot of money to have at that time. And people lost their savings and they had to rely on their family and just try to make the best of what they can. Remind you of anything? Right now is that time too. And so I want to read this story to us and just make us think about it's still important. And let's see if you can figure out the theme of the story, because I know that we talked about the theme many months ago when we read this, but I want to see if you remember what the theme is and how we can apply it today. So here it is. It's called Uncle Jed's Barbershop, and it's written by Margaret King Mitchell, illustrated by James Ransom. Jedediah Johnson was a granddaddy's brother. Everybody has their favorite relative. Well, Uncle Jedediah was mine. He used to come by our house every Wednesday night with his clippers. He was the only black barber in the county. Daddy said that before Uncle Jed started cutting hair, he and Granddaddy used to have to go 30 miles to get a haircut. After Uncle Jed cut my daddy's hair, he lathered a short brush with soap and he spread it all over my daddy's face and he shaved him. Then he started over on my granddaddy. I always asked Uncle Jed to cut my hair, but Mama wouldn't let him. So he would run the clippers on the back of my neck and just pretend to cut my hair. He even spread lotion on my neck. I would smell wonderful all day. When he was done, he would pick me up and sit me in his lap and tell me about the barbershop he was going to open one day and about all the fancy equipment that would be in it. The sinks would be so shiny that they sparkled. The floors so clean you could see yourself. He was going to have 4 barber chairs, and outside was going to be a big, tall red and white barber pole. He told me he was saving all his money up for it. I love the picture of the dog here. The illustrations in this are really nice. He had been saying the same things for years, and nobody believed him. People didn't have dreams like those in those days. We lived in the South. Most people were poor. My daddy owned a few acres of land, and so did a few others, but most people were sharecroppers. That meant that they lived in a shack and they worked somebody else's land in exchange for a share of their crop. When I was 5 years old, I got sick. This particular morning, I didn't come into the kitchen while Mama was fixing breakfast. That was unlike me. Mama and Daddy couldn't wake me up, and my nightgown and my bedclothes were all wet where I had sweated. Has anybody ever been that sick before where you just sweat through everything and you're so sick? And I know there's lots of sick people out there right now, but I can relate to that, feeling really sick in the middle of the night. Mama wrapped me in a blanket while Daddy went outside and hitched the horse to the wagon. We had to travel about 20 miles into town to the hospital. It was midday when we got there. We had to go to the colored waiting room. In those days, they kept blacks and whites separate. There were separate public restrooms, separate water fountains, separate schools. It was called segregation. So in the hospital, we had to go to the colored waiting room. How scary that she's so sick. And they have to make that long distance to the hospital. Even then, I was unconscious. The doctors wouldn't look at me. And I want you to notice the picture right there, if I can get it up there. You see what the sign says? It says colored patients that way and white patients this way. They had different waiting rooms for different colored people. Kind of sad. Even though I was unconscious, the doctors wouldn't look at me until they'd finished with all the white patients. When the doctors did examine me, they told me by Daddy that I needed an operation that would cost $300. $300 was a lot of money in those days. My daddy didn't have that kind of money, and the doctors wouldn't do the operation until they had that money. So what would happen next? I think there's a lot of people out there right now who can relate and think, what's going to happen next? There's a lot going on, and we all don't know the answers to those questions yet. My mama bundled me back up in the blanket, and they took me home. Mama held me in her arms all night, and she kept me alive until Daddy found Uncle Jed. He did find him early the next morning in the next county on his way to cut somebody's hair. Daddy told him about me. Uncle Jed leaned on his bent cane and stared straight ahead. He told Daddy that the money didn't matter. He couldn't let anything happen to his Sarah Jean. Well, I had that operation, and for a long time after that, Uncle Jed came by my house every day to see how I was doing. I know that $300 delayed him from opening the barber shop. Uncle Jed came awfully close to opening his shop a few years after my operation. He'd saved enough money to buy the land and build the building, but he still needed money for the equipment. I love that the dog is right here by their bed. That's sweet. I bet a lot of you have pets that are helping you feel better right now. Anyway, Uncle Jed had come by the house. We had just finished supper when there was a knock on the door. It was Mr. Ernest Walters, a friend of Uncle Jed's. He had come by to tell Uncle Jed about the bank failing. That was where Mr. Walters and Uncle Jed had their money. Uncle Jed had over $3,000 in the bank, and it was gone. Uncle Jed just stood there a long time before he said anything, and then he told Mr. Walters that even though he was disappointed, he would just have to start all over again. Talk about some hard times. That was the beginning of the Great Depression. Nobody had much money. Uncle Jed kept going around to his customers cutting their hair even though they couldn't pay him. His customers shared with him whatever they had. A hot meal, sometimes fresh eggs, vegetables from their garden. They would pay him with those things for his haircuts. And when they were able to pay again, they did. And Uncle Jed started saving his money all over again. Old Uncle Jed finally did get his barbershop. He opened it on his 79th birthday. It had everything, just like he said it would. Big, comfortable chairs, 4 cutting stations, you name it, and the floors were so clean they sparkled. On opening day, people came from all over the county. They were old Uncle Jed's customers, and he had walked to see them for so many years. That day, they all came to him. You can see all the people that came to see his barbershop. His dream had finally come true. I believe he cut hair all night and all the next day and the next night and the day after that. That man was so glad to have that shop, he didn't need any sleep. Of course, I was there too. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. When I sat on one of the big barber chairs, Uncle Jed patted the back of my neck with lotion like he always did, and then he twirled me around and around in the barber chair. But she's a little older now, isn't she? Uncle Jed, he died not long after that, and I think he died a happy man. You see, he made his dream come true even when nobody else believed in it. He taught me to dream too. And that is the end. I love that story because it talks about going through tough times, and it talks about somebody believing in a dream and really thinking and wishing, and even when he was beat down and had some problems in his life, he got back up and he started saving all over again for his dream. And I think it's important while we're home right now under the stay-at-home order that we keep our dreams in our minds too. If you haven't written your dreams down, maybe you should do that. Maybe you should get some paper and make a list of some dreams that you have when this is all over. What do you dream about doing? Do you dream about camping? Do you dream about seeing certain friends? Do you dream about going to a water park? Do you dream about getting with some family members you haven't seen in a long time? That's what I'm thinking about. I miss my mom and dad. And I also dream that there will be a time when I can see students again. I miss you guys a lot. So I hope you're having a good time at home with your families, and know that your teachers are missing you at Bryant School. And we really, really want to be back with you as soon as possible. And we just want you to hang in there and keep thinking about dreams. And maybe you'll have some time to jot down some dreams you have when this is all at the end. Okay? Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.